This is The World This Weekend. Good evening, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Tonight, Canadians fleeing the violence in Sudan say many more remain trapped without an escape route.
A lot of them are not out of the conflict zones. A lot of them can't leave. So it's still quite distressing for us here.
Also tonight, the women shaking up the condom industry.
We should feel empowered to carry them, to really, feel like we're in control of our sexual health.
And as summer movie season ramps up, theater owners want people to remember there's no substitute for the big screen.
The idea of laughing and getting emotional with hundreds of people in a gigantic theater, there is a chemistry that happens. And it's about community. It's about the community coming together.
That's later, but first. Hundreds of Canadians have been evacuated from Sudan, but many more remain trapped as rival generals continue to battle for control of the country. Canada's Defence Minister, Anita Anand, says at least 375 Canadians have left for safety, many on military airlifts, but conditions could deteriorate quickly. Philip Lishanok reports.
Thankfully, they're out.
Sarah El Naim, a Sudanese Canadian who lives just west of Toronto, has been keeping track of members of her extended family.
I am glad that the Canadian government has been able to send flights to Sudan.
While some are safe, she says others cannot leave.
At this time, it's the family members that do not have any kind of foreign or international passports that do not have the option or the luxury of getting out.
Despite a ceasefire extension, fighting continues in the capital. After a brief halt, Canadian flights have resumed from a military airbase north of Khartoum. One more is planned for today.
The window for opportunity at the airfield is closing.
Defense Minister Anita Anand says backup plans are being made in case the situation deteriorates further.
We are exploring options for both air evacuation as well as ground and seaport extraction options, especially at Port Sudan.
Canadian ships are in the region, says Anand, but that will mean making the 800-kilometer overland route to the Red Sea to be rescued. Dennis Thompson, a retired Canadian Army Major General, says for this operation, Canada needs international cooperation.
We shouldn't underestimate the logistics involved when you don't have bases around the world.
Hamid Khalafali is with the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy in Khartoum. He's concerned about what happens after all the foreign nationals leave.
Sudanese people are left behind to fend them for themselves without any support. Some lives are more expendable and disposable than other lives.
He says despite the ceasefire, both parties continue fighting.
But also a humanitarian crisis is unfolding in parallel, where citizens are finding it very difficult to have the basic needs.
Sean Fraser, the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, says there are plans for humanitarian visas for non-Canadian citizens. Sudanese who are in Canada will be allowed to stay.
Sudanese nationals will be able to apply for an extension to their status in Canada.
And there's a plan to expedite travel documents for those fleeing Sudan.
Not only for Canadian citizens and permanent residents, but also the family members who may come.
But many are worried about those left behind, as water, fuel, and food run short, and fear that international attention may turn elsewhere once most foreign nationals are safely out of Sudan. Philip Lishanok, CBC News, Toronto.
U.S. authorities are in pursuit of a man in the woods of East Texas. He's suspected of killing 5 people, and law enforcement officials say the massacre may have been triggered by a noise complaint. Chris Reyes reports.
This man is very dangerous and he is armed. Potentially.
That warning from San Jacinto County Sheriff Greg Capers in the early morning hours of Saturday as police searched for Francisco Oropeza in connection with a shooting in a home in Cleveland, Texas, just north of Houston.
Be vigilant. Keep your eyes open. If you see anything, say something.
Police were called to a house Friday night after neighbors said a shooter was firing an AR-15 style weapon on his front lawn.
Evidently, he stepped out of his house, shot his rifle into the ground up in the air. He just shot his rifle, and subsequently to that, a gentleman stepped out of his house, said, "Hey, we're trying to keep an infant to bed," and he says it's his property. He'll do whatever he pleases on his property.
That's when police say the suspect began to shoot inside a house where there were 10 people. 5 were killed, including an 8-year-old. By the time police arrived, there was a bloody and horrific scene.
2 of the juveniles were found up underneath 2 of the deceased women that were in the bedroom. In my opinion, they were actually trying to take care of them babies and keep them babies alive.
This neighbor says shootings have become too common where she lives.
There's always shootings. There's always people calling the cops, and there's nothing being done. Yeah, especially on holidays, Fridays, Saturdays, there's always shootings. So yesterday I heard the shooting, but I thought it was like a normal day.
According to police, the victims are all from Honduras. This is the 18th mass shooting in the U.S. this year. A mass shooting is when 4 or more people are killed, not including the shooter. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
Global migration levels are at historic highs in numbers not seen since the Second World War. What to do about it has become a political lightning rod in many countries, including the U.S., which has seen escalating numbers of desperate people streaming across its border with Mexico. The CBC's Alex Pineda went to a border crossing in Yuma, Arizona, to get a closer look. I spoke with him earlier. So, Alex, earlier this year, you went to Arizona. Why?
Because America's at a turning point. It's experienced a historic, some argue unprecedented in modern history, wave of irregular migration. And now it looks like President Joe Biden is about to crack down. He's announcing a barrage of policies aimed at stopping people from just walking onto U.S. soil to make asylum claims, which is what's been happening. So what are these new measures? Well, let's say if you claim asylum, your claim gets rejected automatically, unless you first schedule an appointment with U.S. officials before crossing. Also, you get expelled immediately without proof that you tried claiming asylum in Mexico first. And the reason Biden's doing all this now is things could escalate. In a few days, a pandemic-era rule is about to expire. Title 42. For 3 years, U.S. border agents had the power to deny entry using a public health order. When this ends, migration numbers will only escalate. So Biden's begun this preemptive crackdown. And I went to chronicle the state of affairs before things changed, to capture the before picture, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. So with all of that playing in the back of your mind, what did you see at the border?
I spent 2 days at an encampment along the border. And allow me to paint a portrait. It's this dusty patch of land outside of Yuma, next to a dried section of the Colorado riverbed. And I saw Russians, Colombians, Ecuadorians, Dominicans, and they get to Mexico by plane or by bus, and then they get to northern Mexico again by plane or by bus, and they just walk over. They wait a few hours for a border guard to come get them, and they declare asylum. And I'll tell you, the thing that shocked me the most is stories about the Mexican police. I talked to 4 people, 1 man, 3 women, who described being robbed or sexually assaulted by Mexican cops. A woman we've agreed not to identify described these Mexican officers as inhumane.
Te dicen que si tú no les das $100 por persona, te devuelven a tu país.
What she's saying there is that if you don't give these officers $100, they threaten to return you to your country. That they don't care if you cry. They search you. They touch your breasts. They touch your private parts. They take your shoes off. They leave you without a cent. And they don't care if you have enough to eat or not. They're very inhumane. Mexico's government has acknowledged this happens. But the groups say there's almost zero accountability, that these rogue cops, often working with cartels, act with impunity.
This is difficult, and these are heartbreaking stories to hear. What's the reaction been inside the U.S.?
There is strain on the social safety net. The woman who runs the local food bank in Yuma says the demand has sometimes been too much to bear. She used the word invasion to describe the border. The area hospital says it wants compensation from the federal government. It says it's spent over $20 million caring for uninsured migrants.
Okay, so there is some pushback there in the States. And I understand that some people are choosing to act alone, I guess, outside of the government. What can you tell us about that? What are people doing?
So I spent a day patrolling the desert wilderness up in the mountains with a vigilante group carrying AR-15s. And they look for migrants. They occasionally find one and detain them. They call Border Patrol. They also have these motion sensor cameras set up in different places. And I watched some of the footage with them as they collected it. Here in these mountains, the footage shows young adults, mostly men, wearing camouflage with their faces covered, carrying backpacks. The leader of the vigilante group, it's called Arizona Border Recon, describes those family-friendly encampments with asylum seekers as America's front door. Tim Foley says this is America's back door. used by sex traffickers, drug runners, and people with criminal records, people otherwise inadmissible for entry.
People who don't want to get caught, because only bad guys come to your back window and sneak in. This is the back window.
But it's not just hostility. I've seen acts of kindness directed toward migrants. I saw an Arizona police officer bringing food to families. I saw a volunteer feeding migrants. The volunteer said his mother was an immigrant, and he said he sees his own mom in the eyes of these people.
Alex, it's an incredibly complicated story. Thank you so much for going to Arizona to bring it to us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
That was the CBC's Alex Panetta in Washington. Brazilian President Luiz Lula da Silva has granted official recognition to over 2,000 square kilometers of indigenous lands. Much of it is located in the Amazon rainforest and allows indigenous people the right to use it for traditional practices. It also requires special permissions for any logging or commercial farming on the land and would prohibit mining. The move comes as Lula's government works to safeguard against deforestation and illegal mining that surged under the previous administration. In Ukraine, a man mourns his 2 children at a makeshift memorial in the central city of Uman today. 23 people, including 4 children, were killed when a Russian missile hit an apartment building. It is thought to be the deadliest attack on Ukrainian civilians in months. This 9-year-old boy's friend was killed in the strike. I wish her good luck and for her to always be happy in heaven, he says. In Dnipro, a woman and her 3-year-old daughter were killed, according to the city's mayor. In the southeastern Zaporizhia region, Ukrainian soldiers train for a planned spring counteroffensive. Speaking to a group of reporters from Finland, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, President Volodymyr Zelensky said preparations for the offensive are almost complete, but couldn't say when or how it'll happen. A documentary on Russia's fractured opposition premieres tonight at Toronto's Hot Docs Film Festival. Filmed before the invasion of Ukraine, The Last Relic follows a group of dissidents who struggle to gain traction in a country where President Vladimir Putin's power reigns supreme. Briar Stewart has that story.
In a small theater in Tallinn, Estonia, a few dozen people gather to screen a documentary that's been years in the making. Estonian filmmaker Mariana Kot wanted her film The Last Relic to offer a portrait of life in Vladimir Putin's Russia. She followed a handful of grassroots activists in the city of Ekaterinburg as they struggle to oppose the Russian regime.
There's only very few people who really want to fight, let's say. I understood that their attempts are in vain, they will not succeed. That was clear from the very beginning.
Kot and her crew shot the documentary between 2017 and 2019, and then the COVID pandemic put production on hold. During her time in Russia, she watched as the climate of fear became more pronounced.
People were not scared about us, but they were scared if we will film, we'll have troubles.
In the film, the activists she follows all want to see Putin gone, but they can't agree on a strategy. At public events like parades, they would try to convince people to join their protest, but many shrugged or simply ignored them.
And of course, after this film, I feel like an empty feeling in my...
Nikolai Artyemko fled Russia last year and was in the audience in Tallinn.
People in my country do not understand what's right and what's wrong.
But there's a different message that the filmmaker wanted to stress, that Russia's regime has made protest all but impossible.
Inside, you were seeing these changes.
It's a topic Terry McDonald discusses with his class from Tallinn University. He's a Canadian and developed connections with Estonia's Russian community.
So many of, say, the students we encounter here, this regime has been in power since before they're born. They've never known a way to make an impact in a fair and just society, right?
Kot wrapped up filming a few years before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Half of the activists she followed have left Russia. The others are on the radar of Russia's security service, the FSB. She's particularly worried about the youngest activist she profiled.
He avoided all contacts with me because he thinks that it's dangerous now. All data is in the hands of FSB. So,
Khat had hoped to be able to screen the film in Russia. That's now impossible. Instead, she hopes her film will spark a conversation about the struggle to stand up to authoritarianism when it plays to sold-out crowds in Toronto. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
Condoms are still one of the best tools we have to prevent sexually transmitted infections. But the industry is dominated by just a handful of companies, some with hyper-masculine names like Trojan and Magnum. 2 Canadian companies are breaking into the market, both run by women. They say they want to empower women to take control of their sexual health. James Dunn reports.
Looked like something from the 1950s or before.
It was a trip to the drugstore condom aisle that Whitney Geller says inspired her.
Sort of toxic ideas of what sex is and what sexuality should be.
It started with the biggest brand in the section and its iconic warrior head logo, selling sex as a male conquest. Her friend, Yasmin Emery, says many other brands were also a turnoff.
It all seemed to be speaking to males, and that was something, certainly we noticed, we felt excluded.
But the Toronto women's imaginations were turned on. Since they run a design firm together, they decided to start their own condom line called GEMS. Geller says it's all about inclusivity.
So it feels like it's not for women or for men, it's really for everyone.
Their mint green package, bright blue logo, and gender-neutral philosophy has caught the attention of retailers. GEMS is carried in Whole Foods Canada and Loblaws stores in Ontario, and they just launched at Target in the U.S.
We want to be everywhere, and certainly being in those retailers is a dream.
Other women are getting into the $8.3 billion global condom industry that's dominated by Durex, Lifestyles, and the company behind this ad.
Excuse me, Trojan Man?
Yes?
We don't like to wear condoms.
Now, there are at least 10 female-owned companies making condoms, from the US to the UK, Australia, and even India.
Typically, when we think of men carrying condoms, we think they're responsible. What a good guy. He brought the condoms with him.
Victoria Lyons owns Slip, which is based in London, Ontario.
Whereas it's a very different discussion when we look at women and how they're perceived for carrying condoms. So I really wanted to kind of address that stigma.
She launched her condom company last year to help normalize the idea of women buying condoms.
We should feel empowered to carry them, to really, feel like we're in control of our sexual health.
With chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis at high levels in Canada, making condoms more appealing to everyone is critical. But STIs aren't the only issue. Farah Khan is the executive director of Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights.
Women have sex, and so we need to have companies that understand our needs and our desires.
She's encouraged by female entrepreneurs getting into the condom market and says it's about more than branding.
So what we don't want to see is pink washing. We don't want to see a company slap, a cute pink flower on it and say, okay, we got this. So having conversations about consent, having conversations about protection, health is really important.
Most of the women-owned condom companies say they don't use lubricants or other ingredients that cause irritation in their products. Back at the GEMS office,
Latex condoms, 100% silicone lube, nothing more.
Emery says their focus is on creating change.
There can be a real positive outcome if we're able to shift the mindset around condoms.
And that starts with the message that condoms aren't just a man's domain. James Dunn, CBC News, Toronto.
In Canada's north, springtime is a season to savor. After a long winter, the sun has come back and temperatures are less frigid, which means it's prime time for festivals, carnivals, and jamborees. These celebrations are more than just a reason to party. They're about keeping a culture alive. Shannon Scott reports.
In Inuvik, Northwest Territories, couples compete in the jigging contest at the 65th anniversary of the Muskrat Jamboree. It's a popular event at the festival which celebrates not only the end of a long cold winter, but also Gwich'in and Inuvialuit cultures.
This jamboree to me is all about keeping our traditions alive.
Bernice Furlong has been volunteering with the jamboree for more than 20 years. On this night, she's helping to set up the community feast. A highlight for many, it's a chance to eat traditional food they may otherwise not be able to get.
The great attraction is the maktak. People always want to try that. And if you're not one of the people that go out on the land, that's one of the things that you come to the feast for, is to get a taste of the maktak.
Makta is whale, traditionally hunted with a long, heavy harpoon. Dozens of participants got an idea of just how hard it is to hunt one that way in the harpoon throwing contest. Only 3 managed to hit the burlap sack, which stands in for the whale. In Iqaluit, Paul Ergnut cuts large blocks out of the snowpack. He's competing to build the best igloo at the Tunic Time Festival.
Because you have to practice, like with anything. You have to practice to get not good at it, but be able to make an igloo.
Tunic Time is Nunavut's biggest and longest running festival. It's named after the Tunit, the people who lived on that land before the Inuit. Each year, an honorary tunic is chosen. Once, this was a visiting dignitary. Now, it's given to a person living in Iqaluit who gives back to the community. This year, it's Johnny Mikijuk.
I feel that it's a very big honor for a person that's being picked as a tunic. It's a nice role to be.
Back in Inuvik, Bernice Furlong watches drummers and dancers of all ages at the opening ceremonies of the Muskrat Jamboree.
It's kind of dying with our young people today, and they're learning those kind of skills, and we're proud that we're able to let them showcase what they have and how they can do the things out on the land.
For her, this is what these festivals are about, building connections between generations and between youth and their culture. Shannon Scott, CBC News, Yellowknife.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel. Movie theaters have been dealing with dwindling audiences for a while now, with more and more big-budget films going straight to streaming. But at this year's CinemaCon conference, where studios and stars mingle with the theater industry, the chatter was more hopeful. As Eli Glasner reports, industry insiders say the big screen is due for a big comeback.
Up the escalators at Caesar's Palace is a convention you may have never heard of. There are rooms packed with the latest in sight and sound technology. Down another floor, Snackland. What would the movies be without popcorn and Oreo-flavored churros, anyone? How's the feeling? It's appropriate that CinemaCon takes place in the heart of Las Vegas because for the past few years, releasing films into theaters seemed like a gamble. Theater chains went bankrupt, a lot of us stayed home and streamed. Now theater owners are hopeful the studios are ready to double down on the theatrical experience. Jeffrey Cole is the director of the Center for Digital Future at the University of Southern California.
This is a celebration, a genuine celebration. If ever movie theaters were going to disappear, and we've heard for years they will, it was when every theater was closed. A chain went into bankruptcy, we got out of the habit of going to the movies, and even our grandparents learned how to stream.
Behind the flashy posters that cover the hallways is a promise from studio chiefs who are recommitting to making movies for movie theaters. No surprise because it's a symbiotic relationship. Take The Flash, one of the summer's most anticipated titles. When you watch Batman zooming on a new Batcycle, Oscar-winning production designer Paul Osterberry made that.
Yeah, I mean, we're designing these things and we're designing the film for the big screen. I mean, this is a big screen movie-going experience.
How important are movie theaters to being able to make this kind of film? Would you even be able to contemplate something like this?
No, I don't think so. This kind of movie is made for the multiplex. It's made for the big spectacles.
And in 2023, spectacle is what the studios are serving up. But while the calendar is bursting with sequels like Fast X and big brand names such as Barbie,
this is your last ride. Then you might want to buckle up.
Okay, ladies, let's do this!
audiences haven't flocked back to smaller films. And once popular genres like comedy and love stories are in danger of fading from the big screen.
You want to be able to walk into a movie complex, and most of them are complexes, not single theaters, and see a real variety of movies. Or families can go in and even split up in the lobby.
What's here to stay is streaming. While Apple and Amazon are committed to spending billions on releasing films into theaters this year, the CEO of Netflix said bluntly, driving folks to a theater is just not our business. At CinemaCon, let's just say they're taking that in stride. Mitch Newhouser is the managing director at CinemaCon.
Fine, stay on TV where no one's watching what you're watching, and let's champion what Apple and Amazon and the studios are doing.
Well, more needs to be done to carve out places for small stories on the big screen. At a time when many feel divided, movies offer something special. Peter Sohn is the director of Elemental, a new movie from Pixar.
The idea of laughing and getting emotional with hundreds of people in a gigantic theater and all connecting, there is a chemistry that happens. And it's about community. It's about the community coming together. And in a world like now where everything can feel so divided, like what a great way to do that.
A communal experience making a comeback. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
Here you were gonna come to me. And here you are, but you better choose carefully. 'Cause I'm capable of anything, and everything.
Well, there is one thing Katy Perry isn't capable of, winning her Australian trademark battle. She's been duking it out for 13 years against an Aussie fashion designer also called Katy Perry. Designer Perry registered her brand name as a trademark in 2008, the same year singer Perry was just starting to make waves. The singer's lawyers issued a cease and desist, the designer sued, and on Friday a judge agreed that clothes sold for pop star Perry's 2014 Australian tour did breach the trademark, saying this is a tale of two women, two teenage dreams. And one name. The designer told the ABC she's thrilled she took on the Goliath to her David and won.
Absolutely over the moon. I was like fist pumping, like jumping up and down the room.
Of course, superstars fighting for trademarks isn't new. Just ask Mariah Carey.
Don't want a lot for Christmas.
All she wanted was to be called the Queen of Christmas, but was denied. Rick Ross hustled a little better, winning the right to keep his stage name after being sued by a drug dealer using the same name, which brings us to the Battle of the Kylies. Minogue finally did get Jenner out of her head after successfully stopping her from trademarking their shared first name. Minogue says it was nothing personal, but it was personal for designer Katy Perry, who is inspiring others to stand their ground too.
It's going to be hard, but it's so worth it in the end.
As for singer Katy Perry, she'll be okay, and you'll be able to hear her roar when she performs at King Charles' coronation next week. In the meantime, you've been listening to The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.